The heavy, salt-laden air of the shipyard hung thick over the industrial district, filled with the metallic scent of rust and old grease. Elias moved through the shadows of the massive warehouse, his movements steady despite the stiffness in his joints that came from decades of hard service at sea. He was a man of few words, a retired Navy petty officer who had seen the world's most beautiful horizons and its darkest storms, now content to spend his days cataloging heavy ship chains and rusted engine parts. To the other workers, he was a silent shadow, a man who kept his head down and his boots polished, someone they largely ignored because he didn't join in their loud complaints or their rough games. Elias preferred it that way. His memories were enough company for him. He had learned long ago that the loudest voices rarely carry the most weight, and that true strength is found in the quiet moments of observation and the discipline of a job well done. One evening, as a cold rain began to lash against the corrugated metal roof, Elias heard a sharp, aggressive voice coming from behind a stack of shipping containers. It was the voice of Miller, a corrupt contractor known for his temper and his shady deals, and he wasn't alone. He was cornering Maya, a young technical apprentice who had only been with the company for a few weeks. Maya was a hard worker, often seen with grease on her face and a wrench in her hand, but now she looked small and terrified. Miller and his associates were demanding that she sign off on a shipment of defective steel cables, threatening to make sure she never worked in the industry again if she didn't comply. They believed they could break her because she was just an intern with no power, a girl they thought nobody would miss. They didn't see Elias standing in the deep shadows just 20 feet away, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the situation with a soldier's precision. Elias didn't hesitate. He dropped his heavy clipboard and stepped into the dim light of the overhead lamp, his presence suddenly filling the narrow space between the containers. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The quiet intensity in his gaze was enough to make the three men freeze in their tracks. The girl said no, Elias stated, his voice like the low rumble of a distant engine. And those cables aren't going on any ship I'm responsible for. Miller laughed, a forced and nervous sound as he looked at the older man's worn-out work clothes. Get lost, old man. This doesn't concern a warehouse rat like you. Go back to your chains before I decide to replace you with someone younger. Elias didn't move an inch. He stood his ground like an anchor dropped in deep water, his hands relaxed but ready. He had faced down pirates in the Gulf and navigated through hurricanes. A few corrupt businessmen were nothing more than a minor swell in the ocean. My age isn't your concern, Miller, Elias replied, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable threat. What is your concern is that I've already logged the serial numbers on those cables. If anything happens to this girl, or if those cables leave this dock, the maritime authorities will have those logs within the hour. The air in the warehouse turned cold as Miller realized he wasn't dealing with a simple laborer. He looked into Elias's eyes and saw the dormant warrior who was more than capable of ending the confrontation then and there. With a frustrated growl, Miller signaled to his men to leave, their heavy boots clattering on the wet concrete as they retreated into the rain. Maya stood trembling, her eyes wide as she looked at the man who had just saved her career and her safety. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. But they'll fire you for this. Miller has friends in high places. Elias simply picked up his clipboard and gave her a small, reassuring nod. High places don't mean much if the foundation is rotten, Maya. Go home and get some rest. The docks will be here tomorrow. He finished his shift in his usual silence, returning to his tiny apartment overlooking the harbor. He sat by the window, watching the lights of the cargo ships and thinking about the wife he had lost and the life he had spent in service to others. He knew he would likely be called into the main office the next day to be let go, but he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had protected a crew member, and in his world, that was the highest duty of all. He cleaned his small silver anchor medal, a relic from his Navy days, and fell asleep to the sound of the foghorns calling out to each other in the dark. The next morning, a black luxury SUV was waiting for Elias when he arrived at the shipyard gates. Instead of the warehouse, he was escorted to the executive tower, a glass and steel monolith that sat at the very edge of the pier. He entered the top-floor office and saw Maya standing there, but she was no longer wearing her grease-stained overalls. She was dressed in a sharp, elegant suit, standing beside an older man whose face was famous across every shipping route in the world. "Elias," Maya said, her smile bright and full of warmth. "I'd like you to meet my father, Arthur Sterling." Elias blinked in surprise as the billionaire stepped forward and shook his hand with a grip that was firm and full of genuine respect. "My daughter told me everything," Sterling said. "She was working undercover to find the rot in my company, and you were the only one who had the courage to stand up when it mattered." Sterling didn't offer Elias a simple thank you or a small bonus. He offered him the position of Director of Port Operations and Maritime Security. "I need someone who knows the reality of the docks, but has the heart of a commander," Sterling explained. "I need someone who can't be bought and won't be intimidated. I need you." Elias looked at the massive harbor below, the very place he had worked in the shadows for so long. He realized that his life was being handed back to him, not as a reward for his work, but as a recognition of his character. He accepted the role, and within months, the shipyard was transformed. He purged the corruption, improved the safety for all workers, and turned the docks into the most efficient and honest port in the region. He was no longer a shadow. He was the captain of the shore, a leader who was loved by his men and feared by the dishonest. The final scene of the story finds Elias standing on the bridge of a new flagship vessel, Maya by his side as they prepare for its maiden voyage. The salty wind pulled at his new, tailored coat, but his eyes were the same, sharp, observant, and filled with a quiet strength. He looked back at the old warehouse where it had all begun and felt a deep, abiding happiness. He had saved a life, and in doing so, he had found his own purpose again. The lonely veteran had become the anchor of an empire, proving that integrity is the only currency that truly matters in the end. As the ship's whistle blasted a triumphant note into the clear blue sky, Elias smiled. He was home, he was needed, and he was finally at peace, knowing that as long as he was on watch, the horizon would always be bright and the crew would always be safe.